Hi DF, Carl Jobst latest video. I hope I got the pronunciation right
Jobst,
there.
I
That was a good
think.
one.
Jobst. Okay. Hi DF, Carl Jobst latest video on the retro gaming market crash gives me some faith in humanity.
Oh,
However, I'm still hesitant to consider it a victory for gaming collectors and go to a CEX store and buy a PS1 or a Sega Mega Drive game more frequently at the cost of an arm or a leg, most of the time incomplete and slash or without a box. Can you
Right.
speculate how long it will take for the market to settle down and introduce affordable prices for the regular consumer? Thanks and good work with the coverage as of late. So, John, has there been a crash in retro gaming prices?
I was not familiar with that specific video,
Okay.
but I have definitely noticed prices coming somewhat down, or at least sort of stabilizing somewhat. It is an interesting time right now for that, actually. The thing is, though, is like the actual really rare stuff isn't going to get cheap. But what does seem to be happening is that the normal stuff is becoming more affordable again, thankfully. So it's like there was a time where it's like, oh, I want to get this really common game like Super Mario Brothers 3 or something that sold millions of copies, and people were charging an unreasonable amount for it. But I've started to see games like that in that ilk selling for cheaper lately, basically, is what's going on. So I think man, I don't know how to speculate on this, because the retro market is weird and how it works, and it just sort of, a lot of it seems to go with certain people getting into a bubble, and it's almost like a coming of age thing, right? Where like a certain group of people reach a certain age and like, oh, I want to go back and collect the system I was a big fan of back then, and that's constantly shifting upwards, right? And then the consoles older than that already had the collectors, come in there and sweep everything up. Some of that's the common stuff starts to drop down again and become more affordable, where the big heavy hitters, they're not going to get any cheaper. In fact, I have not seen any evidence of the big games actually coming down in price, which is a shame, because there's a few heavy hitters I would like to add to my collection, but
Right.
I have come to the conclusion I will never get a copy of, say, Gimmick for Famicom, or some of the others as well, like a proper Battlemania Daiginjo as well for the Mega Drive. The prices
How-
are just too high.
What about when you were in Japan? Did you?
Oh, well,
was that a
so the
different situation?
prices there are interesting, because my frame of reference is versus when I lived there for a year, 2005 versus now. Obviously, they got way more expensive compared to back then. Everybody knows that, though. Retro games in general did. The prices, though, for me, when you take into account the exchange rate, were very good, I would say. They were much lower than what you could get over here if you're trying to buy Japanese
Right.
games, right? So it that definitely helped make things a lot more affordable. So I was able to get a few heavy hitters over there because they were significantly cheaper than I would normally be able to get them for here. But that's just an exchange rate thing,
Right,
not
it's
so
not a
much
market
like
thing.
right. The whole market hasn't come down on that. In Japan, though, like even then, even if you ignore the exchange rate, like the common games have always kind of remained relatively affordable. Like they used to be dirt cheap, like 50 cents or less for some of
Wow.
this stuff. Now it's going up a bit, but it's not like expensive. I would say it's very affordable for a lot of that.
Okay.
U.S. stuff tends to be U.S. stuff does tend to be fairly expensive on many systems, I would say. PAL stuff is usually pretty easy to get, I find, since he mentioned CEX. I mean, I have seen the prices go up there as well, but like, why would you ever want to buy a PlayStation 1 PAL game? Mega Drive, sure, because a lot of those are actually not localized, or they're not converted to run in PAL mode. So if you play them on a 60 hertz system, they just work better. So like, it's totally fine to get a PAL version, but PS1 games doesn't work like that, and they mostly suck.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
You know.
So, John, I actually have a question. The game you mentioned, Gimmick, would you be cool? It's too rare, obviously, to get, too expensive to get the original cartridge. But what about like a community reprint of the cartridge?
So there's two things about that. I am actually okay enough with reprints of certain games if it's rare enough like that. But there's first of all, a lot of those reprints, I want to add this in here, use flash ROM chips, which maybe don't have the same lifetime expectancy as a mask ROM chip, which is something to think about. And depending on how it's manufactured, there can be issues with like the way the cartridge, the slot is beveled. It's the edge connector on the board itself. If it's not beveled properly, it can actually damage your card slot, things like that. But with Gimmick, the bigger problem is that it uses a special sound chip from Sunsoft, which is amazing, by the way. It sounds really, really good. But if you try to use that cartridge, whether it's, first of all, you have to replicate the sound chip. And once you do that, if you try to use it on a non-Japanese Famicom or a Famicom compatible slot, the actual pin within the cartridge slot for that sound channel is not attached. Right? So you actually don't get correct sound at all. So
Man.
As a result, like you see, there was a re-release of Gimmick on modern platforms, and it was okay enough, but it's just a basic emulation, right? I also had hoped for a cartridge re-release, but I don't think that they're gonna do it because of this. Because they can't just make a single board for all regions. They could release the Scandinavian version of Gimmick, but that has it only came out in Scandinavian countries besides Japan.
So
but they they didn't include the audio chip for that version, so it actually sounds much worse. And it was PAL only as well, so whatever. Okay. There's a lot of like hurdles to jump through with regards to re-releasing games. I've found like that, depending on what's in the cartridge. It's less so for 16-bit systems though. I think that usually works better because there's not as much special hardware needed, and the cartridge ports are the same across all regions.
Yeah,
I actually just got a Famicom game right here in the mail just now. Shall we see what's in the box?
Go on then.
Let's do it. Go on then. Go on, lads.
This is especially compelling viewing for those listening to the podcast.
Yes, exactly.
Describe the box in excruciating detail.
I saw this for a rather surprisingly low price, actually, so I picked it up. It is
maybe the retro market is crashing.
Famicom version of it says Pajama Hero Nemo. It's
that classic.
Nemo. It's the little Nemo the Dream Master for NES. It's the Famicom one. It's a really cool little Capcom game, and I've added it to the collection, so there you go. And yeah, maybe you're right. The market is crashing, and it was much cheaper than usual. That might be the reason.